would be available for such a project, they are not available at this presentation tonight, and I think this is not right, because the Rosin Preservation would have been able to say a few things about the history of the building, the people that built the ice house, emphasize how important the building is to Lee Summit. And we are dealing tonight with just numbers, just dollar figures. And this is, I totally respect that this is very important, but this is all we're going to hear tonight. There is nothing being said about the people who built this house, such as A.J. Hess, the building, the architect, and his mason. So this is a little bit annoying. Very well. So we are going to continue here.
If the structure was going to be sold to a new user for a future development, all this work is still going to be required in addition to whatever work is going to be required to operate, to get ready to operate whatever that new use is going to be. And we don't know what that use is, so we aren't estimating those costs, of course, at this time. So some timing considerations. You have some options, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here in some of the various methods, but we do, the project is eligible to go on the National Register, which would be something that is going to be a required precedent to looking, somebody looking for historic tax credits. You can get both federal and historic tax credits with that listing on the register. It's important, if you go back and think about that sort of diagram of the building, Rosin Preservation.
It is interesting that we are mentioning those historic tax credits from the state of Missouri and from the federal government, but here there are no numbers. They're nowhere to be found, even though the brochures at City Hall that educate people that wish to apply for those historic tax credits. Well, let me remind you what they are. The state of Missouri historic tax credit is 25%, and the federal tax credit is an extra 20%. The applicants can combine the 25 plus 20, that is a 45% tax credit, and that is a lot of money. That is great, and it really makes up for the cost of hiring a firm that will do the historical paperwork. We know that this building will qualify for the National Register of Historic Places. We know that. Another thing is the City of Lee Summit has done that before. Waive the local sales tax for the building and construction materials. So kind of like for schools and not profit entities that benefit from no local sales taxes on all those materials that would be used for repairing, restoring the building, but they will be tax exempt.
Does believe that both the original ice house structure and the 1940 addition, that flat roof section on the sort of northeast corner of the building, both of those are going to be what they call a period of historical significance. So only the portion on the northwest could be removed if the ice house was elected to be saved. That projection on the north does potentially provide some impediments to how that corner might be developed. If you would decide to keep it. But what we're going to see is a bit of a delay as we work through that process to put that on the register. The city could elect to go through the process of putting it on the historical register in advance of finding a buyer or a tenant. And maybe more advantageous to or more make the project more appealing to somebody. but there is that delay in getting that process rolling. There's going to be the delay and also improving the facility and getting ready for a new user. There's going to be some scrutiny from the State Historic Preservation Office and EPA as well. So there's a lot of things to unpack here, a lot of things to consider. Project is, like I said again, it is eligible to go on the National Register. There's going to be some delay, some significant delay in working through that process and then getting it ready. There is going to be a significant amount of cost involved in improving this project for future use. The improvements that are necessary could lower the sale value or the sale value of the building. Or if it goes to a long-term tenant, those improvements will increase the amount that tenant will have to pay in lease costs if the city is going to retain ownership and lease it to a long-term user. Based on what we understand, those lease rates will be far in excess of the going lease rates here in downtown Leaside. So if a potential user has an opportunity to look at one project who
Now, why did the City of Lee Summit wait that long to get started on the process of nominating the Ice House on the National Register of Historic Places, which is the number one qualifier to get the state and federal tax credits? Why? We know also it was not done by the previous owners. I mean, it really doesn't take a rocket scientist to get the nomination. It's just a few forms, and you can place phone calls. You can ask in Jefferson City for assistance. They are very helpful. You can call NPA in Washington, D.C., and they will provide you with help. You don't really have to hire a professional if you have the time. If you don't have the time, the best way to go is to hire indeed a professional such as the reputable firm that is Rosin Preservation. They know what they're doing.
I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you. You did your presentation, Mr. Bishek, already, so we'll open it up for questions. Questions from council. Councilmember DeMoro. Councilmember DeMoro, oh, can you make sure your microphone's on?
Oh, thank you. Oh, I hit it. The 3.4 million that you stated in here, and of course, I think you have a number of about 1.5% per month. So right now, I mean, we're talking, well, probably getting close to 5% right now in September, 5% over that number. So we're up to about almost 3.6 million. I mean, that's a lot of money, and we haven't. There's been no tests of the RECs or anything. Do you have any knowledge? Have you ever had in your career? Have you ever seen a comparable property with RECs like this and the condition of the building rehabbed? Have you ever been experiencing that? Or
I have never personally been involved in that. Our firm has worked on a lot of historic projects. We have several underway right now. None of them have these exact constraints and these exact amounts of cost of what's being achieved. We did include some additional environmental testing. We included some contingency. As a team, we feel like this is a realistic number. And I'll clarify on the escalation. We had included a period of escalation that we felt was appropriate back in April, which would take us all the way to December. If you were going to make some decisions, and then honestly, I would probably push out a little bit now from this standpoint, because there is some work to do before you can undertake a rehabilitation of that structure, of the scope that we've talked about in our report. able to mobilize in April, if you were able to mobilize at the end of the year, it would be roughly these numbers. Now what we're saying is, knowing what the escalation is now versus what we thought it was reasonably going to be back in April, the delta would be adding another 100,000 to this if you were going to start construction by the end of the year. If rehabilitation was going to be something that was going to be directed by council, thinking about we've been over April to September, that's 5 more months. We'll probably be looking in the middle of 2023. We'd have another 6 months of escalation on top of this.
Probably a 3.4, 3.5 million price tag would be about appropriate then.
Well, this is interesting that these gentlemen are discussing increases only on the final cost of restoring the ice house. Well, logically, if we have such a high inflation, the inflation should affect as well the other buildings, including the one that they would like to build to replace the ice house. So, what applies to the ice house, inflation wise, applies to the rest of the campus. That's what I wanted to say.
One question about the historic tax credits. Are they contingent? I'm not sure how they work. Are they contingent on the remediation? In other words,